Sometimes the deepest wounds are not carved by strangers, but by the people who once called you Mom. My name is Margaret Turner, and for 63 years, I built my family's world quietly, until the day I discovered just how invisible I had become in their eyes. My children believed I was too old, too fragile, too out of touch to handle my own money, let alone the family's future. But what they didn't know was that I had been watching, listening, and preparing long before they laid their plans. I am not telling you this for pity. I want you to see how a silent storm brews behind a calm face, and how dignity can be reclaimed, one deliberate step at a time. Before we begin, let me introduce myself again. I'm Margaret Turner, a mother, a grandmother, and now, an unexpected force in my own story. Where are you watching from? If you want to follow every twist in this journey, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's step quietly into my world and uncover how everything changed. Mom, you really need to let us handle the finances from now on. I set down my coffee cup, the porcelain clicking against the saucer. Emily stood in my kitchen doorway, her business suit perfectly pressed, her expression carrying that practiced patience she reserved for difficult clients. "Handle what finances?" I asked, though I already knew where this conversation was heading. "The house payments, the utilities, your retirement accounts. You're getting older and we don't want you to worry about these things anymore." Michael appeared behind her, nodding in agreement. "Mom, Emily's right. We've been talking, and we think it's time." "Time for what?" "Time for you to enjoy your golden years without all this stress," David chimed in from the living room, not even bothering to come into the kitchen for this conversation. I looked at my 3 children, Emily at 42, Michael at 38, and David at 35, and wondered when they had stopped seeing me as capable. When had I become someone who needed managing instead of someone who had managed everything for decades? "I've been handling these finances since your father died 15 years ago," I said quietly. "And you did great, Mom," Emily said, her tone growing more condescending. "But times have changed. Things are more complicated now with online banking and investment portfolios." I almost laughed. If only she knew about the contracting business I'd run alongside her father for 25 years. The payroll I'd managed for 60 employees, the contracts I'd negotiated, the books I'd balanced when the company was struggling. "I appreciate your concern," I said instead. "It's not just concern, Mom." Michael stepped forward, pulling out his phone. "We've already set up automatic transfers for your utilities. Emily's handling your investment advisor meetings." "You've already done what?" "We wanted to surprise you," David called from the couch. "Take some burden off your shoulders." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "You accessed my accounts?" "As your power of attorney," Emily said smoothly. "The paperwork you signed when Dad died, remember?" I remembered signing emergency medical power of attorney. I didn't remember signing away my financial independence. "Where are the papers now?" I asked. "In my safe," Emily replied, "along with your important documents. Much safer than keeping them here." The front door opened, and 8-year-old Lily bounded in, my youngest granddaughter, David's daughter. "Grandma Maggie!" She threw her arms around my waist. "I learned how to make a website at school today. Want me to show you?" "Of course, sweetheart." I hugged her close, grateful for her pure affection. "Mom, we need to finish this conversation," Emily said, but her voice had softened slightly in Lily's presence. "What conversation?" Lily asked, looking between us. Just grown-up boring stuff, Michael told her. Why don't you go play? Actually, I said, I'd love to see what you learned about websites, Lily. Emily sighed. Mom, we really need to... Later, Emily. I turned to Lily. Show me what you learned. As Lily pulled me toward the computer, I caught Emily exchanging a look with Michael. The kind of look that said, see? She's not taking this seriously, but I was taking it very seriously indeed. That evening, after everyone had left, I sat in my late husband's chair and pulled out the photo albums. Picture after picture of birthday, parties I'd planned, school events I'd attended, graduations I'd paid for, Emily's MBA. Who do you think wrote those tuition checks? Michael's house down payment. Where did that come from? David's failed restaurant venture. Guess who covered those losses? I traced my finger over a photo of Harold and me at the office, both of us in hard hats, standing in front of our latest construction project. Turner and Associates had been more than just Harold's company. I'd handled every aspect of the business except the actual construction work. Client relations, project management, financial planning, employee benefits. All me, but they saw me as just the bookkeeper. Just Mom. Just the woman who kept the house running, while the men handled the important things. I closed the album and made myself a decision. If my children wanted to treat me like I was invisible, maybe it was time to use that invisibility to my advantage. The next morning I called Helen Brooks, my neighbor and friend of 30 years. Helen, do you have time for coffee today? Of course, Margaret. Everything all right? You sound different. Everything's about to be very different, I said. I need your help with something. Anything, dear. You know that. I smiled for the first time in weeks. I'm going to start a business. Helen was quiet for a moment. At 63? Helen, I've been in business my whole life. I just let everyone else take the credit. When she arrived an hour later, I had my old business plan spread across the kitchen table. Records of every project Harold and I had completed, every client relationship I'd maintained, every contract I'd negotiated. My goodness, Margaret, Helen said, studying the papers. I had no idea you were involved in all this. Neither do my children, apparently. I told her about yesterday's conversation, about the financial controls they'd assumed, about being treated like a forgetful old woman. What do you want to do? Helen asked. I want to show them who I really am. And I want to make sure they never underestimate me again. Helen smiled, the same determined smile she'd worn when we'd organized the neighborhood watch program, when we'd fought City Hall over the park closure, when we'd helped each other through every crisis for 3 decades. Where do we start? I pulled out a clean legal pad and wrote at the top, Turner Consulting Services. We start by remembering everything I know how to do. Margaret, dear, you're awfully quiet tonight. I looked up from my untouched plate of roast beef to find my daughter-in-law, Grace, watching me with concern. The Sunday family dinner conversation had swirled around me for 20 minutes while I listened. Just enjoying listening to everyone, I said. Mom's been distracted lately, Emily announced from the head of the table. My table, in my dining room. Though she'd somehow assumed the hostess role, I think the financial changes are overwhelming her. What financial changes? Asked Elizabeth, Harold's sister, who'd driven down from Portland for the weekend. We've taken over Mom's accounts, Michael explained, cutting his meat with unnecessary force. She was getting confused about online banking. I set down my fork carefully. I wasn't confused. Mom, you called me 3 times last week, asking about your balance, because you'd moved my money without telling me. Emily laughed, the sound sharp in the warm dining room. See? This is exactly what we're talking about. You're getting paranoid. Elizabeth, I said, turning to my sister-in-law. Do you remember Harold's company? Of course, Turner and Associates. Harold always said you were his secret weapon. Mom did bookkeeping, David said dismissively, finally joining the conversation from where he'd been texting at the table. Actually, Elizabeth continued, Harold told me Margaret handled everything except swinging the hammer. Client meetings, project bids, payroll. That was a long time ago. Emily interrupted. Things are different now. More complicated. Speaking of complicated, Michael said, Mom, we need to talk about this house. It's too big for you now. And the maintenance costs are perfectly manageable. I finished. Mom, be realistic. When's the last time you climbed a ladder to clean gutters or handled a plumbing emergency? Last month, I said quietly. I fixed the kitchen sink myself. Lily looked up from her coloring book. Grandma taught me how to use a wrench. It was awesome. Lily, eat your vegetables, David said sharply. I am, Dad. Grandma, can you teach me about the website stuff tomorrow? Of course, sweetheart. Emily leaned forward. Mom, about that. We think you're spending too much time on the computer. At your age, all that screen time isn't healthy. What exactly do you think I'm doing on the computer? Playing those games, probably. Online shopping. You know how they target older people with scams. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. Helen had spent the week helping me research business, licensing client management software, and professional networking platforms. I'd reconnected with 6 former clients and scheduled 3 consultation meetings. I'm not playing games. Then what? Michael asked. Before I could answer, Elizabeth spoke up. Margaret, didn't you mention you were looking into consulting work? The table went silent. Even David looked up from his phone. Consulting! Emily's voice pitched higher. Mom, what consulting? Property management and small business accounting, I said calmly. There's quite a demand for experienced professionals who understand both residential and commercial projects. Mom. Emily's tone had shifted to the one she used with her most difficult clients. You can't be serious. Why not? Because you're 63 years old, you haven't worked in 15 years, and you don't understand modern business practices. I understand business just fine. Michael cleared his throat. Mom, we admire your enthusiasm, but starting a business at your age, with your limited computer skills. My computer skills are fine. Grandma built a website, Lily announced proudly. It has her picture and everything. The silence stretched longer this time. You built a website? David asked. Lily helped me with the design elements. Emily's fork clattered against her plate. Mom, this is ridiculous. You can't just decide to start a business because you're bored. I'm not bored, Emily. I'm capable. Nobody's saying you're not capable of things. But running a business requires licenses, insurance, tax knowledge, marketing. All of which I handled for Turner and Associates. That was Dad's business, Michael said firmly. You helped with paperwork. Elizabeth set down her wineglass. Actually, Margaret, didn't you handle the Miller project entirely on your own when Harold had his heart attack? I nodded. 6 months, from initial bid to final inspection. The Miller project was a $500,000 commercial renovation, Elizabeth continued, looking around the table. Margaret negotiated with contractors, managed the timeline, handled all the city permits and inspections. Mom never told us that, Emily said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. There's a lot I never told you, I said. After dinner, I helped Grace with the dishes while the others argued about sports in the living room. Margaret, Grace said quietly, I think what you're doing is wonderful. Thank you, dear. Michael doesn't mean to be dismissive, he's having some trouble with his investments lately. Financial stress makes him grumpy. I looked at her more carefully. What kind of trouble? Grace glanced toward the living room, then lowered her voice further. He made some bad trades last month. Lost quite a bit. He's been talking about asking you for a loan. Has he now? Please don't tell him I said anything. He'd be mortified. Your secret's safe, Grace. But as I drove home that night, I thought about my son planning to ask me for money, while simultaneously questioning my ability to manage my own finances. Helen was waiting on my porch, as we'd arranged. How did it go? She asked. About as expected, though I did learn something interesting about Michael's investments. Oh. It seems my financially responsible son isn't quite as responsible as he appears. We settled in my kitchen with tea, and I told her about the evening's conversations. So they still don't take you seriously, Helen observed. Not yet, but Elizabeth planted some seeds, and Lily's inadvertent announcement about the website got their attention. Are you having second thoughts? I sipped my tea, thinking about Emily's dismissive laughter, Michael's condescending explanations, David's complete disinterest in anything I had to say. Not for a second, I said. If anything, I'm more determined than ever. Helen smiled. Good. Because I have news. I talked to my nephew Tom about business licenses, and he gave me the name of a lawyer who specializes in small business setup. She can meet with us Thursday. Helen, you don't have to... Margaret Turner. You've been there for every crisis in my life for 30 years. My divorce, my mother's illness, when Tom was struggling with addiction. Did you think I wouldn't be here for your comeback? I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Thank you. Besides, she grinned, I'm dying to see the looks on their faces when they realize what you're really capable of. As I lay in bed that night, I listened to the house settling around me. The house I'd maintained, the mortgage I'd paid off, the home I'd preserved for my family's Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. Tomorrow I would take the next step in proving that Margaret Turner was far from finished. Mom, we need to talk. I looked up from my morning coffee to find Emily standing in my kitchen, flanked by Michael and David. Their faces wore the same serious expression I'd seen at Harold's funeral. It's barely 8 in the morning, I said. What's so urgent? We've been discussing your situation, Emily began, settling into the chair across from me without invitation. The website thing, this business idea. We're concerned. Concerned about what? Michael pulled out a manila folder. Mom, you forgot to pay your water bill last month. No, I didn't. The notice is right here. He slid a piece of paper across the table. I glanced at it and sighed. That's a notice about construction affecting water pressure, not a bill. And what about this? David held up an envelope. Your bank statement. You haven't opened it, because I check everything online now. Mom. Emily's voice took on that patient tone again. These are signs. Forgetting bills, not opening mail. This confusion about technology. I'm not confused about anything. And now this fantasy about starting a business. We think you're showing early signs of cognitive decline." The coffee mug slipped from my hands, hitting the table with a sharp crack. Coffee spread across the wooden surface. "Cognitive decline? We've made an appointment with Dr. Patterson for next week," Michael said, already reaching for paper towels. "Just to be safe." "And we've talked to a lawyer," Emily added, "about updating your power of attorney documents." I stared at them. "You want to declare me incompetent?" "We want to protect you," David said, but he couldn't meet my eyes. "From what?" "From yourself," Emily said firmly. "Mom, you're 63. You live alone in a house that's too big for you. You're trying to start a business you're not qualified to run, and you're showing signs of confusion and memory loss." "I am not confused." "Then explain the website," Michael challenged. "You supposedly built a professional website in a week? Lily helped me. An 8-year-old helped you build a business website." "She helped with the design. I handled the content, the business information, the service descriptions." "Mom, stop." Emily's voice was sharp now. "This is exactly what we're talking about. These elaborate stories, these claims about business experience you don't have. I do have business experience. You did bookkeeping for Dad's company 30 years ago." I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the kitchen floor. "I need you all to leave." "Mom, leave, now." Emily stood as well. "We're not trying to hurt you. We're trying to help. By taking away my independence, by declaring me incompetent, by making decisions about my life without including me. By protecting you from making mistakes that could cost you everything. The only mistake I'm seeing is trusting my children to respect me." The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. David shifted uncomfortably. Michael stared at the coffee stain on the table. Emily's jaw tightened. "We'll give you some time to think about this," Emily said finally. "But Mom, with or without your cooperation, we're moving forward. We can't watch you make choices that will hurt you." "What choices?" "Living in my own home, managing my own money, starting a business." "All of it," Michael said quietly. "Mom, you're not thinking clearly." After they left, I sat in the expanding silence of my kitchen. The coffee stain had already started to set into the wood, a dark mark on the table Harold and I had bought 40 years ago. I pulled out my phone and called Helen. "They want to have me declared incompetent," I said without preamble. "What?" I told her about the morning's conversation, about the doctor's appointment they'd scheduled, about the lawyer they'd consulted. "Margaret, they can't just—" "They can if they can prove I'm not capable of making rational decisions. But you are perfectly capable." "I know that. You know that. But Emily's a successful businesswoman, Michael's a financial planner, and David's a lawyer. Who's going to believe the confused old woman who thinks she can start a company?" Helen was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want to do?" I looked around my kitchen, at the photo of Harold and me on our wedding day, at Lily's drawing, stuck to the refrigerator, at the coffee stain I'd have to sand out later. I want to show them exactly who they're dealing with. That afternoon, I drove to Elizabeth's house in Portland. Harold's sister had always been my ally, and I needed someone in the family to witness what I was about to tell them. "Margaret, you look upset," she said, opening the door before I'd even knocked. "I need your help." Over tea in her living room, I laid out the whole situation. Emily's financial takeover, the business they were trying to shut down before it started this morning's intervention. "They think you're losing your mind?" They think I'm a confused old woman who needs managing. Elizabeth was quiet for a moment, stirring her tea thoughtfully. Margaret, do you remember the Riverside Mall project? Of course. Tell me about it. I spent the next hour detailing every aspect of the commercial renovation project I'd managed solo while Harold recovered from his heart attack. The contractor negotiations, the permit battles, the budget overruns I'd prevented, the timeline I'd salvaged when the electrical subcontractor walked off the job. 6 months, Elizabeth said when I finished. You single-handedly managed a $500,000 project for 6 months. Harold always said it was the most smoothly run job he'd ever overseen. Except he didn't oversee it. You did. Elizabeth set down her teacup. Margaret, I want you to call a family meeting. Here next Sunday. All of them. Elizabeth, trust me. It's time they learned some things about their father's business that they apparently never knew. When I got home that evening, I found Lily sitting on my front steps, looking forlorn. Sweetie, what are you doing here? Dad's inside talking to someone on the phone about you, she said. He sounds angry. I unlocked the door to hear David's voice from the living room. Not taking this seriously. She actually thinks she can run a business. It's sad, really. I stood in the hallway listening. I know. But she's always been stubborn. Even when Dad was alive, she thought she knew better than everyone else about the company stuff. Lily tugged on my hand. Grandma, why is everyone being mean to you? I knelt down to her level. Sometimes, sweetheart, people don't see others clearly. They make assumptions. Are you really sick like Dad thinks? No, honey. I'm not sick. Then why don't you just tell them you're not? From the mouths of babes. I smiled at my granddaughter, this little girl who saw me more clearly than my own children. You know what, Lily? That's exactly what I'm going to do. That night, I called Emily. Mom, I'm glad you called. Have you thought about what we discussed? I have. Elizabeth has invited the family to dinner Sunday. I'd like everyone there. Mom, if this is about the business thing, it's about a lot of things, Emily. Things you don't know about your father's company. Things you don't know about me. What things? Sunday dinner. Elizabeth's house. 2:00. I hung up before she could argue. Then I opened my laptop and began putting together a presentation that would change everything. You want me to be your accountant? Helen stared at me across her kitchen table. The business license application spread between us like a battle plan. I want you to be my business partner, I corrected. Helen, you managed the books for 3 nonprofits before you retired. You understand taxes, payroll, financial planning. I balanced budgets for charity auctions and volunteer programs. You kept detailed records for organizations with multiple revenue streams, tracked donations for tax purposes, and managed event budgets that would make most small businesses jealous. Helen picked up her coffee mug with shaking hands. Margaret, I'm 70. I haven't worked with business software in years. Neither have I officially, but we'll learn together. I pulled out the notebook where I'd been tracking my resources for the past week. The inventory was more impressive than I'd expected. Look at this, I said, flipping to the first page. I still have relationships with 6 major suppliers from Harold's company, 3 general contractors who remember me personally, the permit office downtown. I know every clerk by name. That was 15 years ago. I ran into Jerry Morrison at the bank yesterday. He's the city's head building inspector now. Remembered me immediately. Asked if I was thinking about getting back into the business. Helen leaned forward. What did you tell him? That I was considering consulting work. He said the city's been looking for qualified consultants to help small businesses navigate the permitting process. I flipped to the next page. Then there's my computer skills, which everyone keeps underestimating. Helen, I've been managing Harold's company database for 40 years. First on paper, then on those old DOS systems, then Windows, now cloud-based platforms. The children think you're computer illiterate. The children see me asking Lily to help with website design and assume I can't use email. Helen laughed. Speaking of which, how many clients have contacted you through the website? 12. Inquiries in 5 days. 2 want estimates for property management services. 3 need help with contractor negotiations for home renovations. And get this, 1 is a city council member who owns rental properties. Margaret, that's wonderful. It gets better. I flipped to my financial analysis page. I own this house outright. No mortgage. Harold's life insurance policy is still earning interest. My retirement accounts that the children are so worried about. They're actually performing quite well. How well? Well enough that I could operate at a loss for 2 years while building the business and still be financially stable. Helen set down her mug. You never mentioned that to your children. They never asked. They just assumed I was struggling financially and needed their help. I pulled out the bank statements I'd printed that morning. Helen, I could buy a new car with cash. I could renovate this entire house. I could take a cruise around the world if I wanted to. Then why haven't you? Because I was raised to be practical, to save for emergencies, to live below my means. I traced my finger down the balance column. What I didn't realize is that financial security also means freedom. Freedom to take risks. Freedom to prove myself. Helen studied the numbers. This is more than enough to start a consulting business. More than enough. We'll need business insurance, professional liability coverage, office supplies, maybe some updated software. But Helen, the biggest asset I have isn't money. What is it? Knowledge. 40 years of construction and property management experience. I know how to read blueprints, evaluate contractor bids, spot potential problems before they become expensive disasters. I turned to a page covered with names and phone numbers. Yesterday, I spent 3 hours on the phone with former clients. The Hendersons still remember how I helped them navigate their kitchen renovation when their contractor disappeared. The Patels credit me with saving them $20,000 on their commercial space build-out. Do they need services now? 2 of them asked me to consult on current projects. The Patels are renovating their second location and want me to manage the contractor relationships. Helen's eyes widened. That's a paying client. It's validation. I closed the notebook. Helen, my children think I'm a confused old woman who needs protection. But the people who actually worked with me professionally remember exactly what I'm capable of. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and smiled. What is it? David needs to borrow $5,000. Apparently his law practice isn't going as well as he pretends. Are you going to lend it to him? I'm going to tell him I'll consider it after Sunday's family meeting. Helen stood up and walked to her window, looking out at the garden she'd maintained for 20 years. Margaret, what if they're right? What if we're too old to start over? Helen Brooks, you organized a neighborhood watch program that reduced crime in our area by 60%. You ran fundraising campaigns that raised over $100,000 for the Children's Hospital. You mediated property disputes between neighbors who'd been feuding for decades. She turned back to me. That's different. How? That was helping people. This is business. Helping people is business. Helen. Half the calls I've received are from homeowners who got burned by contractors, or small business owners who don't understand commercial leases, or elderly people whose families are pressuring them to sell houses they want to keep. I joined her at the window. We're not too old to start over. We're exactly the right age to use everything we've learned. Helen was quiet for a long moment. What would I actually do? Handle the financial side. Client billing, tax preparation, insurance claims, permit fee tracking. Plus, you'd be my reality check. When I get too excited about a project or too angry at a client, you'd keep me grounded. And you'd handle the technical consulting. Property inspections, contractor evaluations, project management, client relations. Helen picked up the business license application. Turner Consulting Services? Turner Brooks Consulting Services. I corrected. Partners. She looked at me for a long moment, then picked up a pen. Where do I sign? That evening, I sat in Harold's old office, surrounded by boxes of his business records that I'd never been able to throw away. Contracts, project files, client correspondence. A paper trail of everything I'd helped build. I pulled out the file from the Riverside Mall project and spread the documents across the desk. Budget reports in my handwriting. Contractor agreements I'd negotiated. Progress photos I'd taken. Change orders I'd approved. Every signature was mine. Every decision was mine. Every problem solved was mine. Tomorrow I'd take these files to Sunday's family meeting. Not to justify myself, but to educate my children about who their mother really was, and had always been. Mrs. Turner, this is Rachel Chen from Patel Properties. I got your number from my father. I nearly dropped my coffee mug. It was barely 7 a.m, and I was still processing that someone had called me Mrs. Turner in a professional context for the first time in 15 years. Of course, Rachel. Your father mentioned you might call. Dad said you helped with the original build-out of our downtown location 5 years ago. I consulted on the contractor selection and managed the permit process. Your father was having trouble with the city planning office. Right. Well, we're opening a second location in Beaverton, and frankly, we're drowning. The contractor we hired has been jerking us around for 3 weeks, and we're behind schedule. I grabbed a notepad, my business instincts kicking in automatically. What kind of delays are you experiencing? They were supposed to start demolition last Monday. Every day it's a new excuse. Today they're claiming they need additional permits that weren't mentioned in the original bid. What type of permits? Something about electrical upgrades for commercial kitchen equipment. I knew immediately what was happening. Rachel, how much additional money are they asking for? $12,000. They say it's not their fault the electrical system needs upgrading. Did they inspect the electrical before giving you the original bid? I don't know. They should have, right? They absolutely should have. Rachel, this sounds like a classic contractor shakedown. They bid low to get the job, then create expensive surprise problems. Can you help us? I looked around my quiet house, then at Lily's drawing still stuck to my refrigerator. I can be there in an hour. The Patel's second location was in a strip mall that had seen better days. Rachel met me in the parking lot. A woman about Emily's age, but without my daughter's practiced condescension. Mrs. Turner, thank you so much for coming. Call me Margaret, and this is my business partner, Helen Brooks. Helen had insisted on coming along, claiming she needed to see me in action. She carried a clipboard and wore the same determined expression she'd used during our neighborhood watch meetings. "Show me the electrical situation," I said. Rachel led us inside, where two men in work clothes were standing around looking busy while accomplishing nothing visible. "Excuse me," I said to the older one. "I'm Margaret Turner, consulting on this project. Can you show me the electrical issues you've identified?" He looked me up and down dismissively. "Lady, this is a construction site. You probably shouldn't." "I've been on construction sites longer than you've been alive." I interrupted. "Show me the electrical panel." Something in my tone must have registered, because he led me to the back of the space without further argument. I examined the electrical setup, comparing it to the commercial kitchen requirements Rachel had described. After 20 minutes, I had my answer. "Rachel, can I speak with you privately?" We stepped outside, leaving Helen to chat with the contractors about their work schedule. "The electrical system is fine," I told her. "It's actually newer than what your downtown location has. These contractors are lying to you." "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. The permits they're claiming you need? They're for a different type of commercial kitchen setup. For what you're installing, the current electrical is more than adequate." Rachel's face went through several emotions: relief, anger, then worry. "What should I do?" "Fire them. Today. Don't pay them another dime." "But what about the work they've already done?" "What work? They've been here 3 weeks and haven't started demolition. They've literally done nothing except waste your time and try to shake you down for extra money." "How do I fire them?" "Leave that to me." I went back inside, where Helen was taking notes, while the contractors explained their fabricated electrical problems. "Gentlemen," I said loudly enough to get their attention, "your services are no longer needed on this project." The older contractor, who I'd now pegged as the crew chief, straightened up. "Lady, we have a contract." "You have a contract to perform work. You haven't performed any work." "We've been here every day." "Doing what exactly? Standing around, making excuses, inventing problems that don't exist?" His face reddened. "Look, we know what we're doing. You don't know anything about construction." I smiled. "I've been in construction longer than you've been alive. I know exactly what you're doing. It's called contractor fraud, and it's illegal. You can't just fire us." "Actually, she can," Helen said, reading from her clipboard. "According to the contract you signed, work was supposed to begin last Monday. It's now Friday, and no work has been performed. That constitutes breach of contract." The younger contractor looked nervous. "Come on, Eddie. Let's just go." "We're owed for our time," Eddie insisted. "You're owed nothing," I said firmly. "In fact, if you continue to harass this client, I'll report you to the Better Business Bureau and the State Contractor Licensing Board." After they left, Rachel stared at me in amazement. "How did you know all that?" "Experience. Rachel, this kind of thing happens more often than you'd think. Contractors who prey on business owners who don't know construction." "Can you recommend someone reliable?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. "I know 3 contractors who specialize in commercial kitchen work. All of them are honest, reliable, and reasonably priced." "Would you be willing to manage the project as a consultant?" I looked at Helen, who nodded encouragingly. "What exactly would that involve?" "Everything. Contractor oversight, permit coordination, timeline management, budget control. Dad said you basically ran our first build-out single-handedly. My standard consulting fee is $75 an hour." Done. Just like that, I had my first official client in 15 years. That afternoon, Helen and I sat in my kitchen, giddy with success. "Margaret, you were amazing today," Helen said. "The way you handled those contractors. Those weren't contractors. Those were con artists with tool belts." "How did you know?" "The electrical panel was clearly labeled with installation dates. The permits they claim to need don't exist for that type of setup, and they'd been there 3 weeks without accomplishing anything visible." My phone rang, an unknown number. "Turner Brooks Consulting Services," I answered, trying to sound professional. "Is this Margaret Turner? This is Jim Morrison, Cascade Construction. I heard through the grapevine that you're back in the consulting business. Jim Morrison." I remembered him as a subcontractor on several of Harold's projects. Young, ambitious, and honest. A rare combination in construction. "Jim, how did you hear that?" "Rachel Patel called me about her Beaverton project. Said you saved her from getting ripped off by some scammer contractors. Word travels fast. In this business, it does. Margaret, I'm calling because I have a client who needs exactly what you're offering. A homeowner who's been burned by 2 different contractors on a kitchen renovation. She's terrified of hiring anyone else, but the project's only half finished. What's the situation?" "Electrical work was done incorrectly, not up to code. Plumbing was rough in wrong. Cabinet installation was botched. She's out $15,000 and has a kitchen that looks like a war zone. And she wants a consultant to help her find someone reliable? She wants someone to manage the entire project. Someone who knows construction but isn't trying to sell her anything." I grabbed my notepad. "What's her name?" "Susan Walsh. She's a single mom, works as a nurse, saved for 3 years to afford this renovation." My heart went out to her immediately. "I'll call her today." After I hung up, Helen shook her head in amazement. 2 clients in 1 day. "Helen, this is just the beginning. There are so many homeowners and small business owners who need advocacy and dealing with contractors. People who know they're being taken advantage of but don't know how to fight back." "You're like a construction superhero." I laughed. "I'm just someone who knows the difference between legitimate work and expensive excuses." That evening, Lily came over for our usual computer time. But instead of playing games or watching videos, I showed her our new business website. "Grandma, you have customers already." "2 clients, sweetie. People who need help with construction projects." "Are you going to get really busy?" "I hope so." Lily studied the screen seriously. "Grandma, why do Dad and Aunt Emily think you can't do this?" I considered how to answer her honestly without criticizing her father. Sometimes people get used to seeing others in a certain way. They forget that people can grow and change and do new things. But you're not doing new things. You're doing old things that you always knew how to do. Exactly. Adults are weird, Lily concluded. Sometimes we are, honey. The next morning, I drove to Susan Walsh's house. Helen had offered to come along, but I wanted to handle this consultation alone. Susan answered the door looking exhausted. She was probably 40, with the kind of tired eyes that come from working too many shifts and worrying about money. "Mrs. Turner, thank you so much for coming. Call me Margaret, and I'm here to help." She led me through her living room to what had once been a kitchen. I'd seen construction disasters before, but this was spectacular in its incompetence. "My God," I said, surveying the damage. "Who did this work?" "2 different contractors. The first one took my money and disappeared. The second one tried to fix the first one's mistakes, but made everything worse. I examined the electrical work first. Wires were exposed, outlets were installed incorrectly, and the circuit breaker panel looked like it had been wired by someone who'd learned electricity from YouTube videos. Susan, this isn't just poor workmanship. This is dangerous. You could have a fire. She started crying. I know. The city inspector red-tagged the whole project. I can't even use my kitchen until it's fixed. What have you been doing for meals? Microwave in the living room. Takeout when I can afford it. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling Jim Morrison. He's going to come look at this today. I can't afford another contractor. You can't afford not to fix this. Susan, I'm going to negotiate a payment plan with Jim, and I'm going to personally oversee every aspect of this project to make sure it's done right. How much will that cost? I looked at this exhausted single mother, living in a construction zone, afraid to trust anyone else with her money. My consulting fee is normally $75 an hour. For you, it's $50, and I won't charge you for time spent coordinating with contractors or dealing with permits. I can't ask you to work for less. You're not asking, I'm offering. By the time Jim arrived that afternoon, I'd already documented every problem, researched code requirements, and outlined a repair plan that would save Susan $3,000 compared to starting over. Margaret, Jim said after examining the work, this is the worst electrical job I've seen in 20 years. Can you fix it? Oh, I can fix it, but it's going to require pulling permits, scheduling inspections, basically redoing everything. How much? He gave me a number that made Susan go pale. Jim, what if we do the work in phases? Electrical first, then plumbing, then finish work. That's possible. Spread the cost over a few months. I turned to Susan. You'd have a functioning kitchen in 3 weeks, and you can pay for the rest of the work over time. You'd really do that? Manage the whole thing? Susan, I've been where you are. Not with construction, but feeling like everyone else knows something you don't. Feeling like you're being taken advantage of because you're not an expert. But I can trust you. You can trust me. That night, I sat at my computer updating the business website with our new services. Project management, contractor evaluation, dispute resolution, and owner advocacy. Helen called just as I was finishing. How did it go with Susan? We're saving her kitchen and her sanity. Margaret, I have to ask, are you doing this to help people or to prove something to your children? I considered the question. Both. But Helen, sitting in Susan's destroyed kitchen today, watching her cry because she was afraid to trust anyone else. That's not about my children. That's about using my skills to help someone who really needs it. And if your children never acknowledge what you're capable of, then I'll know I tried, and I'll have helped people like Susan and Rachel in the process. Your children are going to be very surprised on Sunday. I smiled, thinking about the presentation I'd been preparing. That's the idea. Mom, what's this about a consulting company? Emily's voice was sharp over the phone, catching me, as I finished reviewing contractor bids for Susan's kitchen project. It's exactly what it sounds like, Emily. I'm consulting on construction and property management projects. Mom, we talked about this. You can't just decide to start a business because you're bored. I set down the bid documents. I'm not bored. I'm busy. I have 3 active clients and 2 more consultations scheduled for next week. Silence on the other end. 3 clients? Emily's voice had shifted from dismissive to uncertain. Rachel Patel hired me to manage her restaurant build-out. Susan Walsh needs help salvaging a kitchen renovation disaster. And yesterday, Hendersons called about updating their rental property. The Hendersons? The ones from Dad's old company? They remembered how I helped them navigate their permits 15 years ago. Apparently, good work leaves a lasting impression. Another pause. Mom, are you sure you know what you're doing? Emily, I managed a $500,000 commercial renovation while your father was recovering from his heart attack. I think I can handle a few consulting projects. That was different. Dad was overseeing. Dad was in the hospital. I was overseeing. I heard her take a deep breath. Mom, I'm coming over tonight. We need to talk. I'll be here. After hanging up, I called Helen. Emily's coming over. She sounds worried. Worried about what? About me succeeding, I think. Helen laughed. That's a good problem to have. That afternoon, I met with Jim Morrison at Susan's house to review the electrical repairs. The transformation was already remarkable. Dangerous wiring had been replaced, outlets were properly installed, and the inspector had signed off on the work. Margaret, Susan said, standing in her almost functional kitchen. I can't believe how different this looks. Jim does excellent work, and he's staying on budget. It's not just the work. It's having someone I trust managing everything. I actually sleep at night now. That's what good project management should do. Jim packed up his tools. Margaret, I've got another client who needs exactly what you're providing. A commercial property owner who's been fighting with his contractor for months. What's the situation? Office building renovation. Contractors 3 months behind schedule, way over budget, and the work that's been done is substandard. How much over budget? $40,000 and counting. And the property owner wants to fire the contractor? He's afraid to. The contractor claims he's owed money for work already performed. I pulled out my business card. Helen had insisted we get professional cards printed. Have him call me. I'll review the contract and the work completed. As Jim left, Susan walked me to my car. Margaret, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Why are you doing this? I mean, you could be retired, enjoying your golden years. Instead, you're dealing with construction disasters and difficult contractors. I thought about Emily's phone call, about my children's assumptions about my capabilities. Susan, for 15 years, people have been telling me I'm too old, too out of touch, too fragile to handle complex situations. But you know what? Sitting in your kitchen that first day, seeing the mess those contractors left you with, I got angry. Oh, at the contractors. At the contractors, yes. But also at the idea that women like us, people who aren't experts in construction, should just accept whatever we're told, should trust that others know better. Susan nodded. I felt so stupid, like I should have known they were lying to me. You weren't stupid. You were trusting people who didn't deserve trust. But now you know the difference. When I got home, Emily's car was already in my driveway. She was sitting on my front porch, checking her phone. You're early, I said. I left work early. Mom, we need to talk about this business situation. I unlocked the front door. What about it? Are you really making money consulting? I'm billing $75 an hour for project management, $50 for basic consulting. Emily followed me into the kitchen. How many hours a week? This week, about 30 hours. Next week will be closer to 40. She sat down, heavily at the kitchen table. Mom, that's a lot of money. It's a living. But you don't need a living. You have your retirement accounts, Dad's life insurance, Social Security. Emily, why does it bother you that I'm working? She was quiet for a long moment. It doesn't bother me. I just don't understand why you want to. Because I'm good at it. Because people need help. Because I'm not ready to spend the rest of my life watching television and playing bingo. But Mom, you're 63. Don't you want to relax? Travel? Enjoy your grandchildren? I am enjoying my grandchildren. Lily helps me with my website updates. And Emily, I've never been happier than I am right now. Working 60-hour weeks at your age isn't healthy. I'm working 40 hours a week, doing something I love. That's healthier than sitting around feeling useless. Emily pulled out her phone. I'm going to call Michael and David. We need to discuss this as a family. Discuss what? Mom, you're making major life decisions without consulting us. Starting a business. Taking on this much work. Emily, I'm 63, not 93. I don't need your permission to work. But we're concerned about you overextending yourself. What if you get sick? What if you make a mistake that costs a client money? What if I succeed? What if I'm actually good at this? That stopped her. She stared at me for a moment, and I saw something flicker across her face. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. Are you good at this? She asked quietly. Emily, I've been good at this for 40 years. You just never noticed. My phone rang. The caller ID showed Rachel Patel. I need to take this, I told Emily. Margaret, thank God you answered, Rachel said. We have a problem at the Beaverton site. What kind of problem? The new contractor you recommended. He found something behind the walls that's going to add at least a week to the project. Emily watched as I grabbed my notepad and pen. What did he find, Rachel? Asbestos insulation. The building's older than we thought. How much asbestos? He says it's throughout the kitchen area. I closed my eyes, running through the implications. Rachel, don't let anyone touch anything until I get there. Asbestos removal requires special permits and certified contractors. How long will that take? Probably 2 weeks, depending on the scope of work. But Rachel, this isn't your contractor's fault. This is something that should have been discovered during the initial inspection. What does that mean? It means someone didn't do their job properly when you bought the building. After hanging up, I found Emily staring at me. Mom, you sounded like a real consultant. I am a real consultant. But asbestos removal, permits, certified contractors. How do you know all that? Emily, I've been dealing with building codes and environmental regulations for decades. Asbestos remediation was a huge issue in commercial construction during the 80s and 90s. You handled asbestos removal. I coordinated dozens of remediation projects, wrote the protocols, managed the contractors, dealt with the regulatory agencies. Emily was quiet for a long moment. Mom, I had no idea. There's a lot you don't know about what I did for your father's company. Tell me. For the next hour, I walked Emily through my professional history. The projects I'd managed, the crises I'd resolved, the expertise I'd developed over 40 years in construction and property management. Mom, she said finally, why didn't you ever tell us this? You never asked. And frankly, whenever I tried to talk about the business, you children acted like I was just the secretary who answered phones. We didn't mean Emily. Last month you told me I was too old and confused to manage my own finances. Yesterday you called my business a fantasy. When have you ever shown interest in what I actually know how to do? She stared at the table. I'm sorry. I don't need apologies. I need respect. Emily looked up at me. What can I do? You can stop treating me like I'm incompetent. You can acknowledge that I have skills and experience worth respecting. And you can support me instead of trying to manage me. Is that what we've been doing? Managing you? Emily, you took over my bank accounts without asking. You scheduled doctor's appointments to evaluate my mental competency. You consulted lawyers about having me declared incapable of making my own decisions. We thought we were helping. You were controlling. There's a difference. Emily was quiet for a long moment. Mom, are you really making good money with this consulting business? I'm making more money than I made in 15 years of retirement. And you're happy? Happier than I've been since your father died. She nodded slowly. Then I guess we need to have a family meeting about this. We are. Sunday at Elizabeth's. No, I mean before that. With Michael and David. We need to apologize. And figure out how to support you instead of undermining you. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That would mean everything to me. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. The business skills, the project management, the financial knowledge. Where did you learn all that? I smiled. From your father. And from 40 years of experience that everyone assumed didn't count because I was just helping my husband. You weren't just helping. You were partnering. Now you're beginning to understand. Margaret, you need to see this. Helen's voice was tight with concern as she spread documents across my kitchen table. Financial statements, bank records, and trust documents, all bearing the Turner family name. What am I looking at? I asked, settling into my chair with a cup of coffee. Elizabeth gave me these yesterday. She said you should review them before Sunday's family meeting. I picked up the top document, a trust statement from 6 months ago. This is the family trust Harold set up for the grandchildren's education. Look at the balance. I scanned the numbers, then looked again. Helen, this can't be right. The trust should have over $200,000. Keep reading. I flipped through the pages, my coffee growing cold as I traced the financial trail. Withdrawals, transfers, management fees that seemed excessive. Helen, where did this money go? That's what Elizabeth wanted you to figure out. I pulled out my reading glasses and examined each transaction carefully. Most of the withdrawals were authorized by Emily as the trust administrator, but the amounts and frequency seemed aggressive. Look at this, I said, pointing to a series of entries. $20,000 withdrawn in March for educational expenses. But Lily's only 8, and none of the other grandchildren are in college yet. Elizabeth noticed that too. I flipped to the next page. Another $15,000 in April for trust administration fees. Helen, that's more than most people make in 6 months. What does Emily do with trust administration? Supposedly manages investments and distributes funds for education. But these fees are excessive. My phone rang, David's number. Mom, I need to ask you about something. What is it, David? I'm having some cash flow problems with the practice. I was wondering if you could lend me $10,000, just until things pick up. I looked at Helen, who was listening intently. David, what kind of cash flow problems? Client payments are slower than expected. I have overhead to cover, and my business account is running low. How low? Mom, can you help me or not? David, have you been taking money from the grandchildren's trust fund? Silence. David? That's complicated. The trust allows for family emergency distributions. What kind of emergency? Business expenses, legal fees. The trust document says... David, I helped write that trust document. Emergency distributions are for medical expenses and genuine hardships, not business operations. Mom, my law practice is important to the family's financial stability. Your law practice is your responsibility, not the grandchildren's. After I hung up, Helen shook her head. He took money from his daughter's education fund? It looks like it. And Emily authorized it. I pulled out my laptop and began cross-referencing the trust statements with the original trust documents Harold and I had established 12 years ago. Helen, this is worse than I thought. How much worse? The trust was supposed to grow through investments. Instead, it's been depleted by management fees and family loans. I pulled out my calculator and started adding numbers. In the past 2 years, Emily has taken over $30,000 in administration fees. Michael borrowed $25,000 for investment losses. David took $15,000 for business expenses. That's $70,000. $70,000 that was supposed to fund college educations for 5 grandchildren. I stared at the numbers, feeling a mixture of anger and disappointment. Helen, my children have been lecturing me about financial responsibility while they've been raiding their own children's education fund. What are you going to do? I'm going to find out exactly how much money is missing and where it went. The next morning, I called Elizabeth. Margaret, did you review the trust documents? I did. Elizabeth, do you have access to the original investment records? Harold kept copies of everything in his safe deposit box. I have the key. Can you meet me at the bank today? 2 hours later, Elizabeth and I sat in a private room at the bank, surrounded by 15 years of financial records. The story they told was heartbreaking. Elizabeth, look at this, I said, comparing investment statements. When Harold died, the trust was worth $180,000. Today it's worth $63,000. That's more than half gone. And most of it disappeared in the past 3 years, after Emily took over as administrator. I pulled out the original trust document. Harold wrote very specific language about distributions, money for education, medical emergencies, and essential living expenses if the family faced genuine hardship. Legal fees for David's law practice don't qualify? Not unless it was a malpractice defense or criminal charges. Business startup, costs aren't covered. Elizabeth leaned back in her chair. Margaret, what are you going to do with this information? I'm going to confront them, all 3 of them. At Sunday's family meeting? Before then, I want to give them a chance to explain before I involve the rest of the family. That afternoon, I called Emily. Mom, what's up? Emily, I need to see you, Michael and David, tonight, all 3 of you. Is everything okay? We need to discuss the family trust. The trust? Mom, that's really not something you need to worry about. I'm handling... Emily, I know exactly what you've been handling. 7 o'clock at my house, all 3 of you. Mom, 7 o'clock. I spent the rest of the afternoon organizing my evidence, bank statements, investment records, withdrawal authorizations, and calculations showing exactly how much money had been diverted from the grandchildren's education fund. Helen arrived at 6:30 to provide moral support. Are you ready for this? She asked. I've been ready for 15 years. At 7 o'clock sharp, all 3 of my children sat in my living room looking uncomfortable. Emily kept checking her phone, Michael stared at the floor, and David had the defensive posture of someone expecting an argument. "Thank you all for coming," I said, settling into Harold's chair with my folder of documents. "Mom, about the trust thing," Emily began. "I can explain. I'm sure you can. But first, let me explain what I've discovered." I opened the folder and pulled out the trust balance sheet. When your father died, he left a trust fund worth $180,000 for his grandchildren's education. Today, that trust is worth $63,000. "Mom," Michael said, "investment losses happen. The market? The market didn't lose this money, Michael. You did." I pulled out the withdrawal records. "Emily, in the past 2 years, you've taken $32,000 in administration fees. The original trust document specifies that administrative costs should not exceed 1% annually." Emily's face flushed. "Managing a trust is complicated work. Managing a trust that's being systematically depleted is complicated. Managing a properly invested trust is routine bookkeeping." I turned to Michael. "You borrowed $25,000 to cover investment losses. The trust document doesn't allow for covering personal financial mistakes." "Mom, those investments were supposed to generate income for the trust. Those investments were supposed to be made with your own money, not your children's education fund." Finally, I looked at David. "And you. $15,000 for business expenses related to your law practice. Mom, I needed that money to keep the practice afloat. David, you took money from your daughter's college fund to pay your office rent." The room was silent except for the ticking of Harold's old clock. $72,000, I continued. Gone. And not for education, medical emergencies, or genuine family hardship. For your business mistakes, your administrative fees, and your personal financial problems. Emily stood up. "Mom, you don't understand the complexities of trust management." "Emily, I helped write that trust document. I understand exactly what it was supposed to accomplish and how badly you failed to accomplish it." "We always planned to pay the money back," Michael said quietly. "When? With what money?" "Michael, you just asked me for another loan last week." David cleared his throat. "Mom, we can make this right. We can..." "How?" "Lily needs to start thinking about college in 10 years. Your daughter's education fund has been cut in half while you've been lecturing me about my financial competence." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the yard Harold and I had planted together. "Do you know what hurts the most?" I said without turning around. "It's not the money. It's the fact that while you were stealing from your own children, you were trying to convince everyone that I was too confused and irresponsible to manage my own finances." "Mom, we weren't stealing," Emily began. "What would you call it?" I turned back to face them. "You took money that wasn't yours for purposes that weren't authorized. You violated the trust Harold established to secure his grandchildren's futures. And you did it while trying to have me declared incompetent." The silence stretched long enough for the clock to chime 8 times. "What do you want from us?" Emily asked finally. "I want you to replace the money you took. All of it." "Mom, we don't have $70,000 lying around," Michael protested. "Then you'll have to figure out how to get it. Take out loans, sell assets, work extra jobs, whatever it takes." "That's unreasonable," David said. "We can't..." "David, what's unreasonable is stealing from your daughter's college fund while asking me for money because your business is failing." I sat back down and pulled out one more document. "I've prepared a repayment plan, Emily. You'll return the excess administrative fees at $1,000 per month. Michael, you'll repay your loan at $800 per month. David, you'll repay yours at $600 per month. Mom, those amounts are... Emily started. Exactly what you should have been contributing to the trust all along instead of taking from it. I looked at each of them in turn. You have until Sunday's family meeting to decide. You can agree to this repayment plan, or I can explain to the entire family how you've mismanaged their grandchildren's inheritance. You wouldn't, Michael said. Try me. After they left, Helen and I sat in the quiet kitchen. That was difficult. Helen said. It was necessary. Do you think they'll agree to the repayment plan? They don't have a choice. Helen, I may have been invisible to them for 15 years, but I'm not invisible anymore. No. Helen smiled. You're definitely not invisible anymore. Sunday afternoon, I stood in Elizabeth's living room, facing my entire family. All 3 children, their spouses, the grandchildren, and several aunts and uncles who'd driven in for what Elizabeth had mysteriously described as an important family announcement. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. I have some things to share with you about the Turner family business and the trust fund your grandfather established. Emily sat rigidly on the couch. Michael stared, at his hands, and David kept glancing toward the door like he was planning an escape. First, I want to address some misconceptions about my role in Turner and Associates. I pulled out the Riverside Mall project file and set it on the coffee table. This is a $500,000 commercial renovation project that I managed alone for 6 months, while Harold was recovering from his heart attack. Elizabeth's husband Tom leaned forward. Margaret, I remember that project. Harold was so proud of how smoothly it went. Harold was in the hospital. I handled every aspect of the project: contractor negotiations, permit applications, budget management, timeline coordination, and final inspection. I opened the file and pulled out documents. These are budget reports in my handwriting, contractor agreements with my signature, progress photos I took, change orders I approved. Grace, Michael's wife, looked confused. I thought you just did bookkeeping for the company. That's what everyone assumed. But for 25 years, I was Harold's full business partner. I handled client relations, project management, financial planning, and everything except the actual construction work. Mom, Emily said quietly, why didn't you ever tell us this? I tried, but whenever I mentioned the business, you children acted like I was just the secretary who answered phones. I pulled out another folder. This brings me to my current situation. 3 weeks ago, you children decided I was too old and confused to manage my own finances. Mom, Michael started. Let me finish. I opened the folder. Since then, I've started a consulting business that's already generating over $3,000 per month. I have 5 active clients, all of whom sought me out based on my professional reputation. I handed business cards to several relatives. Turner Brooks Consulting Services, Property Management, Contractor Evaluation, and Project Oversight. Uncle Robert examined the card. Margaret, this is impressive. You're really back in business. I never left business. I just took a 15-year break. Lily bounced in her chair. Grandma saved Mrs. Walsh's kitchen from the mean contractors. Lily helped me build the company website, I continued, because unlike some people, she never assumed I was incompetent. Daniel, Emily's husband, cleared his throat. Margaret, we never meant to imply. Daniel, your wife called my business a fantasy. Your brother-in-law asked me for money while questioning my ability to manage my own finances. Your other brother-in-law took money from his daughter's college fund while lecturing me about financial responsibility. The room went very quiet. Which brings me to the real issue, I continued. The family trust. I pulled out the trust documents and financial statements. When Harold died, he established a trust worth $180,000 for his grandchildren's education. Today, that trust is worth $63,000. Margaret, Elizabeth said carefully, what happened to the money? Excellent question. I opened the financial statements. Emily took $32,000 in excessive administrative fees. Michael borrowed $25,000 to cover personal investment losses. David took $15,000 for business expenses. The silence was deafening. $72,000, I continued, taken from their own children's education fund while they were trying to convince everyone that I was too irresponsible to handle money. Tom stood up. Wait a minute. They took money from the kids' college fund? Without authorization from the trust document, yes. Grace looked at Michael in shock. You took money from our children's education fund? It was temporary, Michael Doe said defensively. I was going to pay it back. When? I asked. With what money? You just asked me for another loan last week. Elizabeth's face was grim. Margaret, what's the legal situation here? Technically, it's breach of fiduciary duty. Emily, as trust administrator, had a legal obligation to protect the beneficiary's interests. Instead, she authorized withdrawals that violated the trust terms. Emily stood up, her face flushed. Mom, you're making this sound like we robbed a bank. Emily, you took $32,000 that wasn't yours for purposes that weren't authorized. What would you call that? Administrative costs for managing a trust that you were systematically depleting? Emily, your administration. Fees were supposed to be 1% annually. You took 15% in 2 years. David finally spoke up. Mom, we all had legitimate financial needs. David, you took money from your daughter's college fund to pay your office rent, while asking me for more money because your business was failing. Lily, who'd been listening intently, raised her hand. Daddy, did you really take my college money? The question hung in the air like smoke. Lily, sweetie, it's complicated. David began. Did you or didn't you? David looked around the room, then at his daughter. Yes, but I was going to pay it back. When I turn 18? Before then. Much before then. How much did you take? Lily, that's not... $15,000, I said quietly. Your father took $15,000 from your education fund. Lily looked at her father for a long moment. Daddy, that's not okay. David's face crumbled as his 8-year-old daughter's words hit him harder than any courtroom argument ever could. Lily, You always tell me not to take things that aren't mine. She continued, her voice small but clear. You said that's stealing. The room was so quiet I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Every adult seemed frozen, watching this child deliver the moral clarity that had somehow escaped her father. Lily's right, I said, gently. Taking something that doesn't belong to you, even if you plan to return it, is still wrong. Grace stood up abruptly. Michael, is this true? Did you really take money from our kids' college funds? Michael's shoulders sagged. The investments were supposed to work out. I was trying to grow the trust fund. By gambling with money that wasn't yours? It wasn't gambling. It was calculated risk. That failed, I interjected. Michael, you lost $25,000 of your children's inheritance on risky investments, then borrowed from the trust to cover your losses. Elizabeth cleared her throat. I think we need to address the legal implications here. There don't need to be legal implications, I said carefully. If the money is replaced? Emily's head snapped up. What do you mean? I pulled out the repayment schedule I'd prepared. I've calculated exactly how much each of you needs to return to make the trust whole. Emily, $32,000 in excess fees. Michael, $25,000 in unauthorized loans. David, $15,000 in inappropriate distributions. Mom, we don't have $72,000 just sitting around, Emily protested. Then you'll need to figure out how to get it, the same way I figured out how to build a business from scratch at 63. Uncle Robert leaned forward. Margaret, what kind of timeline are we talking about? I handed him a copy of the repayment schedule. Emily pays $1,000 per month for 32 months. Michael pays $800 per month for 31 months. David pays $600 per month for 25 months. Those are substantial payments, Tom observed. They're exactly what should have been going into the trust instead of coming out of it, I replied. Daniel stood up. Margaret, this seems punitive. Daniel, what's punitive is 3 siblings stealing from their own children while trying to have their mother declared incompetent. We never tried to have you declared incompetent, Emily said defensively. Emily, you arranged for a conservatorship consultation without my knowledge or consent. What would you call that? Grace was staring at the trust documents. I can't believe this. While you were questioning Margaret's financial competence, you were mismanaging a trust fund? We weren't mismanaging anything, Michael said. The investments? Michael, stop. Grace's voice was sharp. Just stop. You took money from our children, from Lily, from all of them. Lily got up from her chair and walked over to me. Grandma, will you teach me about money so I don't make mistakes like Daddy? I put my arm around her. Of course, sweetheart. That's what grandmothers are for. Can you teach me how to start a business, too? Lily, David said weakly, you're 8 years old. So, Grandma said I helped with her website. Maybe I can help with other things, too. Helen, who had been quietly observing from the corner, spoke up. Margaret, what happens if they agree to the repayment plan? Then we move forward as a family. The trust gets restored. The grandchildren get their college funds back. And everyone learns from this experience. And if they don't agree? Elizabeth asked. I looked at each of my children in turn. Then I'll have no choice but to explore legal options for recovering the money that was taken from my grandchildren. Emily's face went pale. You'd sue us? I'd sue to protect Lily's future, and your children's futures, Emily, and yours, Michael. Mom, David said quietly, we messed up. I can see that now. Yes, you did. But the question is what you're going to do about it. Michael stood up and walked to the window. The monthly payments. They're going to be tight. They should be tight, I replied. That's what consequences feel like. What about the business? Emily asked. Will you keep running Turner Brooks Consulting? Of course. Why wouldn't I? Well, I just thought. Maybe we could work together, combine resources. I studied my daughter's face. Emily, are you asking to join my company? I'm asking if there's a way for the family to move forward together. There is, but it starts with acknowledging what happened and making it right. Grace walked over to the trust documents. Margaret, can I see the original terms Harold set up? I handed her the folder. He was very specific about the purpose and the protections. These are good terms, she said after reading for several minutes. Conservative investment strategy, clear distribution guidelines, built-in protections against exactly what happened. Your father-in-law was a thorough man. Why didn't he make you the administrator instead of Emily? I sigh. He thought it would be too much work for me after he was gone. He wanted to protect me from the responsibility. Instead, he protected the people who were taking advantage of his protection, Elizabeth observed dryly. Tom cleared his throat. Margaret, if they agree to the repayment plan, what oversight will there be going forward? I'll resume my role as co-administrator of the trust. All major decisions will require my approval. That seems fair, Uncle Robert said. You clearly understand the financial complexities better than anyone gave you credit for. Lily tugged on my sleeve. Grandma, when the money comes back, will there be enough for me to go to college? There will be plenty, sweetheart. Your grandfather made sure of that. Even if I want to study business like you? Especially if you want to study business. Emily sat down heavily. Mom, I need to ask you something. What? How long have you known? About the trust, I mean. I've suspected for months that something was wrong, but I only got the full picture this week. Why didn't you say something sooner? I looked at my eldest daughter, successful, driven, and right now looking very young and scared. Because I was hoping I was wrong, and because I wanted to give you a chance to correct it yourselves. We should have come to you, Michael said from the window. When we got into financial trouble, we should have asked for help instead of taking money that wasn't ours. Yes, you should have. Would you have helped us? David asked. I would have tried. But I also would have helped you find solutions that didn't involve stealing from your children. The room fell quiet again. Several of the relatives were looking at the trust documents, whispering among themselves. Finally, Emily spoke. What do we need to do to make this right? Sign the repayment agreement. Stop making payments immediately and accept that things are going to be different going forward. Different how? I'm not going to be invisible anymore, Emily. I'm not going to sit quietly while important decisions are made around me. I'm not going to pretend I don't understand business or finances just to make you feel more comfortable. We never wanted you to be invisible, Michael said. Then why did you treat me like I was? He didn't have an answer for that. Helen stood up. I think Margaret has made her position very clear. The question is whether her children are prepared to step up and do the right thing. Grace looked at Michael. We are going to sign the agreement. Grace! Michael started. No, Michael. We're going to sign it, make the payments, and repair the damage we've done to our children's future. David nodded slowly. I'll sign too. Lily deserves better from me. All eyes turned to Emily, who sat staring at the repayment schedule. Emily, I said gently. She looked up at me, and for a moment I saw the little girl who used to help me, in the garden before ambition and pride built walls between us. I'll sign, she said quietly. But Mom. Yes? I want to understand how you built the consulting business so quickly. Will you teach me? For the first time in 15 years, my eldest daughter was asking me to teach her something. Of course, I said. But first you need to rebuild the trust you broke. Both the financial trust and the family trust. How long will that take? I looked around the room at my family. Broken, humbled, but still mine. As long as it takes, I said, but we'll do it together. The next 3 months tested every ounce of patience I'd cultivated in 63 years of life. Emily arrived at my office every Tuesday morning at precisely 9 o'clock, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors like a countdown timer. She'd sit across from my desk with her arms crossed, reviewing trust documents and financial reports with the enthusiasm of someone attending their own funeral. "The Henderson account needs approval for a change order," she'd say, sliding papers across my desk without making eye contact. "What's your recommendation?" I'd ask, though we both knew she hadn't bothered to analyze the request. "You're the boss now," she'd reply, the words carrying enough acid to strip paint. Michael proved slightly more manageable, perhaps because his pride had taken such a thorough beating during the family meeting. He showed up on time, followed instructions, and occasionally even offered useful insights about the contracting side of the business. "Margaret," he said one Thursday afternoon, looking up from a stack of invoices, "the Riverside project is coming in under budget. Should we bank the savings or suggest additional improvements to the client?" It was the first time in years he'd asked for my business opinion rather than trying to give me one. "What would you recommend?" I asked. "Bank it, but mention the savings to Mrs. Patterson. She'll appreciate the honesty, and it'll generate goodwill for future projects." "Good thinking. Draft the letter." David remained the most challenging. He arrived late, left early, and spent most of his time looking like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. But he showed up, and that was more than I'd expected. The real revelation came during our 4th week working together. Lily had stopped by after school to help update the company website, and she was showing David how to use the project management software I'd implemented. "Uncle David, see? If you click here, it shows all your pending tasks, and this red notification means something needs your attention." David squinted at the screen. "I don't understand why we need all this technology stuff. Dad never used computers for his business." "Grandpa didn't have 5 active projects running simultaneously," Lily replied with the patience of someone far older than 8. "Plus, Grandma's clients expect modern communication. Look, you can send photos directly from the job site to the client's portal." I watched from my desk as my youngest son learned project management from my youngest granddaughter. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Lily," David said after a moment, "how did you learn all this?" "Grandma taught me. She's really smart about technology stuff." David glanced over at me, and for the first time in months, his expression wasn't defensive or resentful. It was curious. "Mom, when did you learn all this computer stuff?" "YouTube University," I replied, not looking up from my own laptop. Turns out old dogs can learn new tricks if they're motivated enough. By the end of the first month, something unexpected began happening. The business was growing. Mrs. Patterson recommended us to her neighbor, who needed help managing a kitchen. Renovation. The Henderson project finished ahead of schedule and under budget, leading to 2 referrals. Helen fielded calls from potential clients almost daily. "Margaret," she said one afternoon, hanging up the phone with a smile. "That was the 3rd call this week asking specifically for you. Word is getting around about the quality of your work." Emily looked up from her paperwork. "What kind of reputation?" "Honest, thorough, and reasonably priced," Helen replied. "Plus, clients like working with someone who actually returns their calls." "Dad always returned calls," Michael protested. After 3 days and 2 follow-ups, I corrected. I return calls within 4 hours. The monthly family dinners resumed, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Instead of sitting at the end of the table while conversations happened around me, I found myself in the center of discussions about business strategy, client relations, and project timelines. "Mom," Emily said during our October dinner, "the Johnson renovation is more complex than we initially estimated. The electrical work alone is going to add 2 weeks to the timeline." "Have you discussed this with the client?" "Not yet. I wanted to get your input first." Grace nearly choked on her wine. "Emily just asked for your input instead of telling you what she's already decided to do." "Times change," Emily replied stiffly. "Yes," I said. "They do." The real test came in November, when we received our biggest contract yet, a complete office renovation for a law firm downtown. The project was worth over $100,000 and would require coordinating 4 different subcontractors over 3 months. "This is too big for us to handle," Emily said when I showed her the proposal. "We should refer it to Morrison Construction." "Why?" I asked. "Because we don't have the capacity." "Emily, we have the expertise, the relationships, and the project management systems. What we're lacking is confidence." Michael leaned forward. "Mom, if we mess this up, it could damage our reputation. Permanently. And if we succeed, it establishes us as a major player in the commercial renovation market." David shook his head. "The risk-to-reward ratio is too high." I looked at my 3 children, successful, educated adults who were afraid to take the same kinds of calculated risks I'd been taking for months. "Let me tell you what I see," I said, pulling out the project folder. "I see a client who specifically requested us because of our reputation for quality and communication. I see a project that plays to all our strengths. Michael knows commercial, electrical work. Emily understands office design requirements, and David has experience with permit coordination. What if something goes wrong?" Emily asked. "Then we fix it. That's what contractors do." "What if we lose money?" "Then we learn from the experience and do better next time." "What if?" "Emily, what if we succeed?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Helen cleared her throat. "Margaret, what's your instinct about this project?" "My instinct says we can handle it. But more importantly, my analysis says we can handle it." I pulled out the detailed spreadsheets showing timeline estimates, budget projections, and risk assessments. "I've broken down every aspect of this project. I know where the potential problems are. I've built buffer time into the schedule, and I've identified backup solutions for the most likely complications." Michael studied the spreadsheets. "Mom, this is incredibly thorough. This is how I've been managing every project for the past 6 months." Emily picked up one of the budget worksheets. "These profit margins are conservative, but realistic. And sustainable," I added. "I'd rather make a reasonable profit on a job done right than maximize profit on a job done poorly." David was examining the timeline. "You've allocated 3 days for permit processing, but city permits usually take 5 to 7 business days. I've been working with the city planning office for 6 months. I know which permits can be expedited and which ones require standard processing time." "How do you know all this?" Emily asked. "Because I've been doing the work instead of just talking about it." The room fell quiet, except for the rustle of papers as my children reviewed my analysis. Finally, Michael spoke up. "I think we should take the contract." Emily and David stared at him. "Seriously?" he continued. "Mom's right. We have the skills, and she's done the homework. Besides, if we keep turning down opportunities because we're afraid to fail, we'll never grow." "Emily?" I asked. She studied the project proposal for another long moment. "The client seems reasonable, the timeline is realistic, and the profit margins work." She looked up at me. "Let's do it." "David." My youngest son shrugged. "I'm outnumbered, but I want regular progress meetings and detailed documentation of every decision." "Agreed," I said. "Helen, please call Mr. Morrison tomorrow and accept the contract." As my children left that evening, Emily lingered by the door. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How long have you been this good at business?" "Always. You just never noticed." She nodded slowly. "I'm starting to realize there's a lot I never noticed. It's never too late to start paying. Attention. Mom? Yes? I'm proud of what you've built here. I should have said that sooner." After she left, Helen and I sat in the quiet office, reviewing the next day's schedule. "How are you feeling about working so closely with your children?" Helen asked. "It's complicated. Sometimes I feel like I'm watching them discover who I really am for the first time. Other times I wonder if it's too late to build the kind of relationship we should have had all along." "What does your gut tell you?" I considered the question, while organizing the project files. "My gut says it's never too late to be seen for who you really are. Even if it's uncomfortable for everyone involved? Especially then." Helen smiled. "You know, Margaret, I think you're becoming the woman you were always meant to be." "What do you mean? Visible, respected, in charge of your own story." I looked around the office, at the project boards covered with timelines and budgets, at the client files organized and up to date, at the family photos sharing space with business awards. "Helen, I think you're right. For the first time in 15 years, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The phone rang, and I answered it with the confidence of someone who finally knew her worth. "Turner Brooks Consulting, Margaret speaking. How can I help you?" Christmas morning arrived with 6 inches of fresh snow and the kind of crisp winter light that makes everything look possible. For the first time in years, I woke up excited about Family Gathering. The downtown law firm project had finished 2 weeks ahead of schedule and $5,000 under budget. The client was so pleased they'd already recommended us to 3 other businesses. Turner Brooks Consulting was no longer just my quiet rebellion. It was a legitimate success. I stood in my kitchen preparing Christmas breakfast when Lily bounded through the back door carrying a wrapped box nearly as large as she was. "Grandma, I made you something." "Lily, sweetness, you didn't need to make me anything." "Yes, I did. Open it." Inside the box was a professionally bound photo album, titled Turner Brooks Consulting Year 1. Lily had compiled photos from every job site, copies of client testimonials, newspaper clippings mentioning our projects, and even screenshots of our 5-star online reviews. "Lily, this is incredible. When did you have time to put this together?" "I've been working on it since Halloween. Mom helped me get it printed at her office." I flipped through the pages, seeing my year of growth documented through 8-year-old eyes. There were photos of me meeting with clients, reviewing blueprints, and standing proudly in front of completed renovations. In every picture, I looked confident, capable, and genuinely happy. "Look at this page," Lily said, pointing to a section titled, What People Say About Grandma. She'd collected testimonials from clients, subcontractors, and even city officials. Mrs. Patterson had written, "Margaret Turner is the most professional contractor I've ever worked with. She treated my project like it was her own home. The building inspector had noted, Turner Brooks sets the standard for preparation and communication. Other contractors should take notes. Lily, how did you get all these quotes? I asked. People like talking about good work, Grandma. The back door opened again, and Helen arrived carrying a covered dish and wearing a smile that suggested she knew about the album. Helen, did you see what Lily made? I helped with the printing, Helen admitted. But the idea and all the work were hers. The rest of the family began arriving around noon. Emily came first, carrying a bottle of wine and looking less tense than she had in months. Michael and Grace followed with the twins, who immediately gravitated toward Lily's latest technology project, a tablet app she'd designed to track Santa's route. David arrived last, and for the first time in years, he wasn't looking at his phone or checking the time like he had somewhere better to be. Mom, he said, hanging up his coat, I brought someone I'd like you to meet. A woman about David's age stepped forward, extending her hand with a warm smile. Mrs. Turner, I'm Sarah. David's told me so much about your consulting business. All good things, I hope. Very impressive things. I run a small accounting firm downtown, and I've been hearing wonderful reviews about Turner Brooks Consulting from several of my clients. David cleared his throat. Sarah and I have been seeing each other for a few months. I wanted her to meet the family. It was the first time David had brought anyone to a family gathering in over 2 years. The fact that he was proud enough of our family and my business to introduce Sarah felt like a small miracle. Dinner conversations centered around business, projects, and plans for the new year. But instead of the competitive, sharp-edged discussions of previous years, there was genuine collaboration and mutual respect. Mom, Michael said, passing the mashed potatoes, I've been thinking about the expansion ideas we discussed. What if we hired another project manager and started taking on residential new construction? That's a significant jump in complexity, I replied. We'd need additional licensing, different insurance coverage, and probably 2 more full-time employees. But the profit margins are better, Emily added, and there's definitely demand in the market. True, but we'd also be competing with established builders who have decades of experience and existing relationships with suppliers. David set down his fork. What if we started smaller? Maybe additions and major renovations instead of ground up. Construction? I looked at my 3 children engaged in productive business discussion, asking for my input instead of dismissing my concerns, building on each other's ideas instead of competing for dominance. Those are all valid points, I said. Let's table the decision until we see how the first quarter develops. Growth for the sake of growth isn't always wise. Spoken like a true business owner, Sarah said with a smile. After dinner, while the others were in the living room, Emily helped me load the dishwasher. Mom, I need to tell you something. What's that? Working with you these past few months has been educational. In what way? Emily paused, her hands full of dinner plates. I always thought business was about being the smartest person in the room, making the fastest decisions, and staying ahead of the competition. Those things matter. But watching you work, I've learned that business is actually about relationships, preparation, and consistency. You spend more time listening than talking. You solve problems before they become crises. You make clients feel valued instead of just profitable. I continued loading silverware, letting her words settle between us. Emily, what are you trying to say? I'm trying to say that I was wrong about you, about your capabilities, your understanding of business, your ability to handle complex decisions. I was so focused on protecting you from what I thought were risks that I never recognized you were already managing those risks better than I was. She set the plates down and turned to face me directly. I'm trying to say I'm sorry, and I'm trying to ask if you'll teach me what you know. For 15 years, I had waited for one of my children to see me as something more than an aging mother who needed protection. For 15 years, I had hoped one of them would recognize that I had wisdom worth learning. Emily, I'd be honored to teach you. Really? Really. But you have to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll remember this feeling the next time you're tempted to underestimate someone because of their age, their position, or your assumptions about their capabilities. Emily nodded solemnly. I promise. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Helen and I sat in the living room with cups of tea and the photo album Lily had made. How are you feeling about everything? Helen asked, grateful, proud, a little tired. I laughed. Starting a business at 63 is more exhausting than I expected. But worth it? I flipped through the album again, pausing at a photo of me shaking hands with the law firm partners after the project completion. In the background, Emily, Michael, and David were talking with the construction crew, all of them smiling. Helen, for 15 years after Harold died, I felt like I was disappearing. Like every year I became a little less visible, a little less relevant, a little less myself. And now? Now I feel like I'm exactly who I was always meant to be. Not just a mother or a grandmother, but a woman with skills, opinions, and something valuable to contribute. The business? The business is wonderful. But what matters most is that my children finally see me. Really see me. Not as someone who needs protecting or managing, but as someone whose judgment they trust and whose approval they value. Helen smiled. It only took a complete revolution of family dynamics. Sometimes that's what it takes. I closed the album and looked around the living room, at the family photos spanning decades, at the business awards now mixed among the personal mementos, at the Christmas tree decorated with ornaments made by grandchildren who were learning to see their grandmother as more than just a source of cookies and bedtime stories. Helen, do you know what the best part is? What? I'm not angry anymore. For months I carried this resentment about being overlooked and underestimated. But now that I've proven what I'm capable of, the anger has been replaced by something better. What's that? Peace. I know who I am. My family knows who I am. And I don't have to fight for visibility anymore. I just have to keep being myself. The phone rang, and I glanced at the caller ID. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hello, this is Margaret. Mrs. Turner, this is James Morrison from Morrison Construction. I hope I'm not calling too late. Not at all, Mr. Morrison. How can I help you? I've been hearing impressive things about Turner Brooks Consulting. I have a client who needs exactly the kind of careful, detailed project management you're known for. Would you be interested in discussing a partnership opportunity? I looked at Helen, who was listening with raised eyebrows. Mr. Morrison, I'd be very interested in that conversation. When would be convenient for you? After we arranged a meeting for the following week, I hung up and turned to Helen. Morrison Construction wants to partner with us. Margaret, that's huge. They're the biggest general contractor in the county. I know. Are you ready for that level of success? I considered the question while finishing my tea. 6 months ago, I would have been intimidated by the prospect of working with Morrison Construction. I would have worried about being out of my depth, about making mistakes, about proving my children right about my limitations. But 6 months ago, I was a different woman. Helen, I'm ready for whatever comes next. But more importantly, I'm not afraid of it anymore. What changed? I picked up the photo album one more time, studying the image on the cover. Me standing in front of our office sign, wearing a hard hat and safety vest, looking directly at the camera with complete confidence. What changed is that I stopped asking for permission to be who I've always been. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 times, marking the end of Christmas Day and the beginning of whatever came next. Helen, thank you. For what? For believing in me before I remembered how to believe in myself. Margaret, that's what friends do. As Helen gathered her coat and headed home, I walked through the house, turning off lights and checking doors. In the kitchen, I paused at the window overlooking the backyard Harold and I had planted together 30 years ago. The garden was dormant, now covered in snow, but I could see the promise of spring in the careful placement of the beds, the mature trees, the structure that would support another season of growth. Like the garden, I had spent years being prepared for this moment without realizing it. Every project I'd managed during Harold's illness, every contract I'd negotiated, every crisis I'd solved, it had all been practice for the life I was finally living. I turned off the kitchen light and headed upstairs, carrying Lily's photo album and the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had reclaimed her own story. Tomorrow would bring new clients, new challenges, and new opportunities to show my family, and myself, what I was capable of achieving. But tonight I was simply Margaret Turner, mother, grandmother, business owner, and finally, after 63 years, exactly who I was always meant to be.